We are focused on one thing and one thing only this week, the SAVE Act. If you haven't heard about it or you've only seen it in passing, buckle up, you're in for a ride. I am Maggie Gelsen-Burnett.
And I'm Mallory Hagan. This is Pretty Furious. Should we start again with "Okay, Maggie"? Maybe that'll be on merch at some point. Okay,
We're here.
Maggie.
Perfect.
You'll get a yes hi, and I'll get a okay, Maggie.
Amazing. I love it.
We have another Big Mad episode today because the SAVE Act deserves an episode all to itself, if we're being honest. We did mention it at the top of our episode with Deshauna, but people need to really understand the gravity of the situation. But before we get into that, we've got a lot going on. We'd love for you to be following us online. Where can people find us?
You can find us literally everywhere, you guys. It's at Pretty Furious Pod. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, YouTube, Substack. We have a website, literally all of the places. And you can find us anywhere that you get your podcasts. The best way to support this show is by A, listening, and B, leaving us a review, leaving us a 5-star review, we would love. Or if you want to leave us a mid 3-star review, like our lovely friend from early on, that'd be great too. We are open to any and all. We will roast you on an episode though. So follow us everywhere, and we do still have a giveaway happening over on Instagram. We are trying to actively grow our Instagram following, grow our community over there. So go follow us on Instagram and join our giveaway.
Yeah. Also, we've been posting rage reports. So if something makes you mad, shoot it our way. We'd love to add it to our rage reports.
Yes.
Okay, before we get into the SAVE Act, which we are actually pretty furious about, we can't be pretty furious without being pretty first. What product are you loving this week?
Okay, so my product this week is the Giorgio Armani, I don't know what this is called, but it's the mascara. Looks like this. And I used it for the first time last week maybe, and I have not been able to put it down. I am a mascara snob. I am very particular about mascaras. Really, really have found one from the drugstore that I love that will hold a curl all day long. So I tend to lean a little bit more on the luxurious side of mascaras in that I'll throw down some coin for a good mascara. This was sent to me, but I would buy it for sure.
That is so funny. I am the exact opposite. I have
Really?
one product that I have used since the dawn of my time.
Is it the pink Maybelline mascara?
No,
or is it CoverGirl?
No, it's L'Oreal.
Okay.
L'Oreal Voluminous, or the what's the pink one?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
L'Oreal mascaras really hit the mark for me, and I've tried a million things. I've tried a bunch of expensive things, and L'Oreal just seems to be the thing that works. But I love that. Maybe I'll give it a shot. Maybe I'll try it.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
You know, why not?
What's your
For
product
the
this
one day
week?
a week that I put on makeup.
Which is today, which is anytime we
today.
record.
Which, by the way, again, we gotta stop that.
I need to just get ready every day.
And one day we're just gonna say, you know what, ball caps, no makeup. So my product this week, I actually bought this Charlotte Tilbury lip gloss in Pillow Talk for my wedding, which was almost exactly a year ago today.
Oh my God.
Not only have I managed to hold on to it, I've also been wearing it for a year, which means that not only do I love it, but it's long lasting. Like, a tube of this is lasting me for a full year. And it
That's
looks
amazing.
beautiful.
It's a lovely color.
Thank you.
I didn't know that they made glosses that like worked in conjunction with all I'm familiar with is the Pillow Talk lip liner. So I didn't know that they made a gloss too.
Well, that's good news.
Very
I actually
cute.
didn't know that there was a Pillow Talk lip liner, so maybe I'll go
Oh
buy
yeah,
that.
everybody's like obsessed with it. Yeah, I need to try it. I've never used it before, but I've heard amazing things about it. So
the gloss is where it's at.
all right, Mallory. So this week we are going to maybe omit the headlines that we both have because we both just have one major topic that is making us pretty furious. Do you want to get into it?
The SAVE Act, like I mentioned, we talked about this for just a moment on our last episode, and the more I thought about it after the House voted on it, the more I was like, I really think that American women need to understand what's at stake here. So the SAVE Act is short for the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act. And on the surface, you might think that this bill is about protecting elections, maybe stopping voter fraud or making sure people who shouldn't vote can't sneak in and vote. And if that was truly what it was about, that might be fair, maybe. But today we're digging into sort of why the SAVE Act isn't what it seems and how it could actually do more harm than good. So if you care about your right to vote, or your neighbor's right to vote, or just democracy in general, which is slowly slipping through our fingers, stick with us. So this bill requires individuals to provide documentary proof of U.S. citizenship when they're registering to vote in federal elections. So when they're going to vote for the president or for their congressperson or their senator. And what that means is documentary proof of citizenship means a birth certificate, a passport, which, by the way, you need a birth certificate to apply for, and it also costs over $150. Or you need naturalization papers. So you can't just have a sworn statement. You cannot use your driver's license or your social security number. Specifically, this bill prohibits states from accepting and processing an application to register to vote in a federal election unless the applicant presents that proof of citizenship. So it specifies what documents are considered acceptable proof of U.S. citizenship, and it also says that this complies with the Real ID Act of 2005 that indicates U.S. citizenship. So it's basically saying that you need to go through the same process to vote as you do to obtain a real ID, which, just sidebar, if you don't have your real ID yet and you're a frequent flyer, you need to get that by May 7th, for those of you who haven't done that yet. I need to do that. So that's sort of the baseline.
So, quick question, Mallory, for you on this. This bill currently prohibits people who even may already be registered to vote, just to clarify, right?
That's where things get muddy.
Got it.
There's calls for voter registration rolls, which is like a literal roll call in your state of who's registered to vote. There's calls for those to be purged, but I'm not sure.
So essentially starting over.
Well, not entirely. And I just want to make it clear that anytime a person moves, they have to re-register to vote. So even if I'm registered, for instance, right now I'm sitting in a house that my husband and I rent, but next week we're moving to a new house. So if this were to pass the Senate, and whenever the implementation date is, moving to that new house would now mean that I have to go re-register to vote. And typically in Alabama, because I have an Alabama driver's license, I can register online in Alabama. I just upload my license number, say that my address has changed, and I re-register to vote, and I get my little card in the mail. That process would no longer be possible because now I have to prove that I'm a citizen in order to re-register to vote. So we're going to get into the hurdles of what that presents. Yeah.
So further, the bill would first prohibit states from registering an individual to vote in a federal election unless at the time the individual applies to register to vote, they provide that documentary proof of U.S. citizenship. So the passport, birth certificate, etc. And secondly, it requires states to establish an alternative process under which an applicant may submit other evidence to demonstrate U.S. citizenship. So each state must take affirmative steps on an ongoing basis to ensure that only U.S. citizens are registered to vote, which should include establishing a program to identify individuals who are not U.S. citizens using information supplied by certain sources. Do we know what certain sources means? And then additionally, the states must remove non-citizens from their official list of eligible voters. So
just to interject, there are some local and city elections, depending on where you live, where they do allow people who are non-citizens to vote. So they allow tax-paying people who live in those areas to vote. And that's city by city, county by county, whatever it is. Like they create and make those own rules. So what I think is happening is they're essentially saying we must remove anyone who's a non-citizen, no matter what they have voted for in the past.
I have so many thoughts and feelings about all of this, but let's talk a little bit more about the bill itself. So the bill allows for a private right of action against an election official who registers an applicant to vote in a federal election who fails to present that documentary proof of U.S. citizenship. So this also is putting the people who work at the polls up for grabs, essentially. Like this is making sure that they are also held liable for not following these rules. So this is just, yeah, an egregious step on all of our rights. And this really makes me think, oh shit, where are we headed with all of this? It's one of those instances that I'm having right now.
Yeah. Yes, and that's exactly where you should be. And I also want to point out, it's not just election workers who are volunteers. We're talking about the people who work at the local DMV, at your county clerk's office, the places that you typically have to show up physically to register to vote. I know that you know people who aren't paying attention, don't realize that there's an election happening at all, and then they've missed the deadline to even register to vote in the first place.
100%.
Anyway, anybody who's listening, I could see how, if you don't understand the nitty gritty of all of the ways that this could make voting more difficult, it might sound reasonable to people. Like, what's the big deal? We just have to prove that we're citizens. Only citizens should be voting. And that is true. But only citizens are allowed to vote in federal elections already. That is the law already. So this bill is a solution looking for a problem, like many pieces of legislation introduced by Republicans. But it really, I mean, it honestly could have major consequences. So they're saying that this is a way to combat voter fraud. But the question is voter fraud actually a problem? And the answer is no. So as I mentioned, first of all, non-citizen voting is already illegal. It is already something that is a crime, and it's a federal crime, and it can lead to jail time and it can lead to deportation. So I don't know about you, but any person that I know that's immigrated to the United States is not about to risk being deported to vote in our janky ass elections.
Hell no. Hell no.
So it's incredibly rare that something like that happens in the first place. Like, it's almost literally non-existent. And politicians at all levels of government have repeatedly and falsely claimed the 2016 election, 2018, and 2020 elections were like marred by large numbers of people voting illegally. But extensive research, which, Maggie, we've talked about, science, research,
Data. Facts.
Facts.
All good things.
Not feelings, not opinions, facts. Extensive research reveals that fraud is very rare. Voter impersonation is virtually non-existent, and many instances of alleged fraud are, in fact, often just mistakes by voters or administrators. So the same is true for mail-in ballots, which are secure, and they're really essential to holding safe elections, and they were specifically during the COVID pandemic. But study after study from groups like the Brennan Center for Justice and even state-level audits show that non-citizens voting barely happens. So it's like worrying about shark attacks in your bathtub. It's just not a thing. So the Brennan Center's seminal report, The Truth About Voter Fraud, that's the title of the report if you want to go look at it, conclusively demonstrated that most allegations of fraud turn out to be baseless, and that most of the few remaining allegations reveal irregularities and other forms of election misconduct. So numerous studies, including one commissioned by the Trump administration, have reached the same conclusion.
Perfect.
So, like I said, sometimes it's people who vote accidentally, like they believe that they were eligible. And sometimes that actually does include people who maybe have gone to jail or who have a felony conviction. Like, there was a case in Florida where I think it was like 20 formerly incarcerated people were arrested for voting, even though they were given registration cards. They didn't realize that they didn't have that right. And many people in jail do have the right to vote, just so we're clear.
Mm-hmm.
So conservative leaning groups often lump all these people together where they act like people are intending to commit fraud or there's something nefarious going on. But the truth of the matter is this is not a problem. However, when it is a problem, Maggie, I sent you a link. I would love for you to open it and just read to me maybe the headline and the first paragraph or so.
So this is, let's be clear, this is my first time seeing this headline and I have not read it in any capacity prior to this. Okay, so this is from NBC News. It says, Georgia Republican Party officially voted illegally 9 times, a judge ruled. Brian Pritchard, the vice chairman of the Georgia Republican Party, was fined $5,000. $5,000, that's it, for voting illegally and registering to vote while serving a sentence for a felony, a judge ruled.
So I just Pulling it back. Republicans for almost a decade now have been sowing this distrust of our elections process. By the way, if you Google voter fraud, it is always, almost always, a Republican in a red state,
Mm-hmm.
typically a middle-aged to older white man, who has
Shocker.
voted multiple times. So the question is, if it's not actually a problem, voter fraud is really not an issue, study after study, including the Trump study, say that, then what do you think this bill is really about?
Well, if you ask me, I mean, it's about keeping women from voting. So let's talk a little bit about what this bill would do and who it would impact. So the SAVE Act would require people to show, like we said, official documents proving their citizenship just to register to vote. Now, so let's think about that for a second. How many people do you know, Mallory, who walk around with their birth certificate or their social security card or a passport even in their possession?
I personally have a copy of my birth certificate.
Exactly.
I could not tell you where my actual birth certificate is.
Exactly. And many Americans, especially older people, lower income folks, students, communities of color, they don't have easy access to these documents. Maybe they were born at home and they were never even issued a certificate. Maybe they lost their papers in a flood or a fire, natural disaster of sorts. Maybe they just can't afford to order new copies. It's expensive to get copies of your birth certificate. I had to present one every single time that I competed for Miss Iowa, and it's always, you have to get it stamped by like the seal of your person in your county. It's expensive to get those copies. So the process to obtain them is often very complicated, and especially so if you were born somewhere other than where you currently reside. So if you've moved at all, that presents an entirely different obstacle. So let's also not forget about naturalized citizens. So people who went through the legal immigration process and became Americans. So they might be full citizens, but they might not have those papers on hand when they're registering to vote. So what happens then? Those people who are legal, eligible voters could get kicked off the rolls or denied the right to vote entirely. So that's not protecting democracy, that is fully suppressing it. So, and we talked a little, Mallory, too, about the implications that this would have on people, especially married women, and the hoops that you would have to jump through just to obtain, to your point, a copy of your birth certificate. Like, you'd have to call your county courthouse probably and get a copy of that sent to you. So it's insane to me how much this oversteps everything that we know about saving democracy.
Yeah. Well, and, so last week I was watching a town hall I had two Democrats and two Republicans. I think it was on CNN. I can't remember. And the Republicans kept clapping back to this bill being discussed, the SAVE Act being discussed on the town hall. And they were like, you need an ID to do virtually anything in the United States, which is true to an extent. But virtually anything isn't a right granted to us. Like renting an apartment, yeah, you need an ID. That's not a right. That's a need. It's a want, a desire. Driving a vehicle, that's not a right granted to me. That's something that I need to do in order to get from point A to point B. But my voting, that is a right. So let's talk about the 14th Amendment for a second, because it extends citizenship to all natural born or naturalized Americans, regardless of their race, and guaranteed that rights of citizenship, like voting, cannot be restricted by the states. And then the 15th Amendment prohibits restricting the right to vote due to race. The 17th Amendment requires states to elect senators by popular vote. And the 19th Amendment extends voting rights to all women. And the 26th Amendment extends the right to vote to everyone 18 years old and older. Additionally, the 24th Amendment explicitly bans poll taxes, which often prevent low-income citizens of all races from voting. So if you remember civil rights movement, if you understand anything about poll taxes, so poll taxes can look like a literacy test, it can look like an actual fine. And to me, this step requiring women to dig up birth certificates, to make sure that their name matches their birth certificate, all that kind of stuff, to me, that is a poll tax. It requires that you spend money and time to go gather all of these things at different government agencies so that you can vote.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, this isn't the first time that we've seen laws that sound really neutral on the surface, but have the effect of keeping people from voting. So, to your point, throughout American history, we've had literacy tests, poll taxes, grandfather clauses, all kinds of tricks used to stop Black people, immigrants, and poor people from voting. And at every single time, those laws were justified by claims of, quote, protecting elections or, quote, keeping things fair. So, sound familiar? In 2013, the Supreme Court gutted a key part of the Voting Rights Act. And since then, we've seen a wave of new laws that have made it harder to vote, especially for people who have been historically marginalized. So the SAVE Act fits right into that pattern. It looks very clean on the outside and very, very innocuous. And it has a really truly dangerous impact underneath.
Yeah. So if this bill passes, number one, millions of voters could be at risk for being purged from the voter rolls or prevented from registering, which we've discussed. Number two, states could be forced to overhaul their registration systems. And in fact, they'll have to. There's not a could be. They will have to. And that will cost us millions of dollars, millions of taxpayer dollars. Think about that. I mean, we're already gutting government systems and people who work for the government. We're closing things like the Social Security offices. We are eliminating the workforce that would be tasked with doing this in the first place. And now you're talking about overhauling the system all the way around. Who's going to do that? And who's going to pay for it?
Mm-hmm.
And all of this when there's no fraud to fix. And then the third thing is it honestly, it opens up more restrictions in the name of election integrity, which too often just means fewer people are voting. And for those who actually believe in democracy, democracy only works when everyone has a voice. And every roadblock that we put between people and the ballot box just weakens that system, not strengthens it. And you know that is exactly what they desire.
Mm-hmm.
So
right. So here's kind of where we land with this. The SAVE Act is not about saving democracy. We have made that abundantly clear. It's about narrowing it. So it's a distraction from the real issues, like expanding access to the polls, protecting voter rights, and making sure every American has a fair shot at having their voice heard. This is this administration's Trojan horse. It is the thing that it's the thing that they are best at.
The thing that I think people need to be reminded of is when you have good ideas and when you have good policy, you don't need to restrict people from voting. When you have something worth voting for, you should be able to rest easy that that is a plan of action that is actually the best vision forward for America. So by them trying to remove people's right to vote or their access to the ballot box, they are only projecting that they know that their ideas are shitty.
Exactly. You're exactly right. And they know those ideas are so piss poor that if they can remove the large populations that would be against those ideologies and those policies, then they're just one step closer to implementing them. So if they can remove a large chunk of married women and just rely on their husbands to vote instead, then they have removed a roadblock that is an integral part of them making sure that they pass the legislation that they want to, which with this administration could look like something where they prevent women from voting and they do have a household vote of sorts or something to that effect.
That actually reminds me, I'm sure you've seen the clip of the pastor. I can't think of his name, but even if I could, I wouldn't even give him the time of my day. But he is on camera saying they believe there is a movement toward women no longer voting and giving their voice to their husband. And if they're not married, their father or their brother, and that instead there's a household vote. So if you're listening to this and you don't think this is a real thing, I just want to be very clear that this is the first step to that, right? Make it difficult for you to register, make it difficult for the process. You lose interest or you decide it's not worth it, whatever it might be. And your husband, who doesn't have to go through that same process, which in and of itself means this is not fair, your husband then becomes the voice for your family. And I know some women who are married to men who they don't agree with. How? I do not know. But
Literally.
So just be sure if you were the person who canceled out your husband's vote this last time, we still need you to do that.
Yeah. I think a big piece of this too that I just want to state on the record is I know plenty of women who I think consider, well, what's the big deal? What's the point? Why should we be so concerned about our right to vote? Or maybe there are people who didn't vote in this last election or the previous election. I know plenty of women I'm not friends with them, let's be clear, but I know plenty of women who didn't vote. To that, I just want to say almost all of those women have children, have daughters. And I just want you to consider for literally 5 minutes what that looks like for your children, for the next generation of women who can't vote, have to rely on a male partner to vote for them, who maybe if your daughter ends up being gay, she just can't vote at all. She gets sent to a special camp somewhere because she's on medication for antidepressants, whatever it is. I want you to consider how all of these policies do impact the next generation, because I think a lot of women are not in tune enough with themselves, maybe, to understand how it impacts them, or maybe they don't care enough about themselves to understand how it impacts them. Plenty of people like that too. Maybe consider then the people you care about the most, your kids, and what that's going to look like for the next generation.
So you bring up something that reminds me, when I was campaigning, both in 2018 and 2022, in my 2018 campaign, when I ran for Congress, I had 13 college campuses in the district that I was running for. And so often I would knock on a door and a young person would answer, young women would answer, and they would say, I don't really do politics, or like, I don't really know what's going on. And like, to a degree, I totally get it. There's a certain level of privilege that allows a certain demographic of young people, and specifically women, to sort of be oblivious to what's going on in the world or to caring. I would stand in someone's doorway and I would say, do you see this door frame? The door frame that you're standing in is political. It is the certain width that it is because someone advocated for that width for things like wheelchairs, for your furniture to fit through. There is a standard in the house that you're standing in because it's political. The pen you're using, the way it's manufactured, political. Everything you do and touch, see, the air you breathe, the water you drink, everything is political. And that old classic saying, you might not do politics, but politics is gonna do you, baby.
I was just gonna say that tweet that's like, yeah, politics gonna do you, honey.
That's my last ditch effort to make sure that people really understand this is serious. And if you didn't vote in the last election, I'm pretty angry with you, but I hope you'll take a moment to recognize what a mistake that was, and you will heed our call to action.
Yes. And let's be clear, we are speaking to white women here. So women of color have done their work and done their job. They have 90% of them voted properly. Yes. So anyway, what can you do? What are the things that we have control over? Call your senators. Tell them to vote no on the SAVE Act. You can find their contact info at senate.gov. You can download the 5 Calls app. You can list where you live, and it will give you your senators and give you their phone numbers. So apparently there are several senators, including Democratic senators, who are sitting on the fence about this bill.
There were actually 4 members of Congress who are Democrats that also voted for this. So just because you're in a Democratic district does not mean you are safe from your Democratic senator doing this. Please call.
Yes. And look up if your senator was one of those 4, and be relentless. Like, that is the name of the game when we are calling these people. Flood them with calls, flood them with emails, make it so that their offices have to do more work. Make your discontent with them known. That is the best way that they will do what you want them to do and do the right thing, is if they know that their constituents are pissed off. Don't listen to this and think someone else will call. Another person from my district will call. You need to be the one to do that too. Everybody has a role here. The next thing that you can do is talk about it. Share this episode, post on social media, have conversations with your friends and family who might not know what's in this bill. It's extremely important. It could change the course of elections for years, if not decades to come. It is so important that we are educating those around us. I remember our first episode of Pretty Furious, we talked with the lovely Erin Dittmer about how you might be the only person in somebody's circle who is talking about this thing on social media. So keep posting about it. Do not let up on this. If you are the one person who is speaking about it and one person who might not have access to this information or doesn't know about this hears you talking about it, that's big. that changes somebody's perspective, hopefully. So continue to do those sorts of things that might seem small. Next, you can support voting rights organizations, groups like the Brennan Center, the ACLU, or your local League of Women Voters. They are fighting for this every single day. Democracy ultimately does not protect itself. We have learned that firsthand over the last 8 years. So we have to show up. We have to be willing to do the work. We have to speak up. We have to push back against all of this. So do what you can with what you have.
So odds are, if you're listening to this, you are somewhat politically inclined. Maggie and I talk about politics on our personal platforms all the time before we started this podcast. And while this podcast does have a heavy emphasis on headlines and what's going on, we understand that not everyone is entrenched in what's happening in the news all day, every day. We just happen to be. So it's okay if you don't understand everything, and it's all right if you didn't even know this was happening or you didn't understand all the implications of it. What I think is really important is like committing on a daily basis to checking in with what's going on in the world, because we have a lot of people I know. I have a lot of friends who are like political warriors, and recently they've just been like, it's too much. I can't look at it anymore. I've deleted apps off my phone. I'm not looking at what's going on. And while I truly understand that, because it's a lot, that is what they want us to do. That is exactly what they want us to do. And as you mentioned, as white women, we are the problem and we can be the solution, but we have to dig in and make sure that we're paying attention to what's going on. So truly, please heed our advice on these action items. Call your senator, share this with somebody you know. And if this helped you understand the SAVE Act just a little bit better, we'd love if you would subscribe, leave us a review like we mentioned, and share it with somebody that you care about, because this might be our last our last hurrah of our voting rights. We need to keep them.
This could be our last episode.
Well, with the way political retribution is going on, it actually might be. So see you never.